The morning sun barely filtered through the tinted windows of the Douglas mansion on the Upper East Side of New York. Inside, chaos reigned. 20-year-old Marcus Douglas paced the marble floors of his father's mansion, his designer shoes clicking with each anxious step. His 9-month-old daughter Zara had been sick for 3 days now. Her fever wouldn't break, and her tiny body trembled with each labored breath. "Where are those doctors?" Marcus shouted at his father. "Billionaire real estate mogul Richard Douglas. You said they'd be here by now." Richard's face remained calm despite the storm brewing inside him. "They're on their way, son. The best pediatric specialists in the country. They better save my baby," Marcus whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I can't lose her too." It had been only 6 months since Zara's mother died in childbirth, leaving Marcus a single father at 20. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Money isn't an issue. We'll get the best care for Zara." Outside the mansion gates, 17-year-old Lionel Jackson swept the sidewalk of the neighboring brownstone. He'd been working odd jobs since he was 12, helping his grandmother make ends meet in their tiny apartment in Harlem. Today, he was filling in for his friend who usually cleaned for the wealthy families in this neighborhood. Lionel watched as luxury cars pulled up to the Douglas mansion. Men and women in expensive suits rushed inside, carrying medical bags. He counted 20 different doctors throughout the morning. Something serious was happening. "Boy, keep sweeping. I'm not paying you to stare," barked Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who owned the brownstone. "Yes, ma'am," Lionel replied, turning back to his broom. But his eyes kept drifting to the commotion next door. Inside the Douglas mansion, doctors crowded around baby Zara's crib in the nursery. The room, decorated in soft pinks and whites, now resembled a hospital ward. Machines beeped, monitoring Zara's vital signs. Her dark curls were damp with sweat, her brown skin flushed with fever. "We've tried everything," said Dr. Monroe, the lead pediatrician. "The antibiotics aren't working. The fever keeps rising." "Then try something else," Richard shouted, his composure finally breaking. "I've brought the best minds in medicine here. 20 of you, and you're telling me you can't save one baby?" Marcus sat beside Zara's crib, holding her tiny hand. "Please," he whispered, "please save her." Dr. Monroe shook his head. "We've consulted with specialists worldwide. Without knowing exactly what's causing this reaction, we're shooting in the dark." Richard's face darkened. "Do you know who I am? I can make or break your career with one phone call. Fix this." Outside, Lionel finished sweeping and collected his pay from Mrs. Peterson. As he walked past the Douglas mansion, he heard a baby's wail, weak but desperate. He paused, remembering his little cousin who'd had febrile seizures last summer. His grandmother, a former midwife from Jamaica, had saved the baby with an old remedy when the hospital sent them home with just Tylenol. Lionel hesitated at the gate. People like him didn't knock on doors like these. But that baby's cry tugged at something inside him. Taking a deep breath, he approached the security guard. "Excuse me, sir. I think I might be able to help with the baby." The guard laughed. "Kid, there are 20 doctors in there. What could you possibly do?" "My grandmother was a midwife. She taught me things about fever in babies that doctors sometimes don't know," Lionel persisted. "Get lost before I call the cops," the guard warned. Lionel backed away, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to help. He circled around to the service entrance where staff came and went. When a catering truck arrived with food for the medical team, Lionel slipped in behind it. Inside the mansion, tension had reached a breaking point. Zara's temperature had hit 105 degrees. Doctors argued about ice baths versus medication. Marcus held his daughter, sobbing as she convulsed in his arms. "We need to get her to the hospital," Dr. Monroe insisted. "She might not survive the trip," another doctor countered. Richard slammed his fist on an antique table. "I built a hospital wing. I donate millions to medical research. And you can't save my granddaughter?" Lionel crept through the service corridors, following the sounds of commotion. When he reached the nursery doorway, he watched the scene unfold. The doctors looked defeated. The baby's father looked broken. And the baby, she looked like his cousin had last summer, right before his grandmother stepped in. Taking a deep breath, Lionel stepped into the room. "Excuse me." All heads turned. The security guard who had denied him entrance appeared behind him, grabbing his arm. "Sorry, Mr. Douglas. This kid snuck in." "Wait," Lionel said quickly before they could drag him away. "I know what's wrong with her. It's not a normal fever." Richard waved dismissively. "Get him out of here." But Marcus looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Wait, what do you mean?" Lionel pulled away from the guard. "My grandmother was a midwife from Jamaica. She says sometimes babies get what we call fire fever. Regular medicine doesn't work. You need to put her head under cool running water." The doctors exchanged looks of disbelief and amusement. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Monroe scoffed. "We're trying serious medicine here, not folk remedies." Richard stepped toward Lionel. "You have exactly 5 seconds to leave before I have you arrested." But Marcus stood up, cradling Zara. "Dad, stop! We've tried everything else. You can't seriously be considering taking advice from some street kid," Richard exclaimed. Lionel straightened his shoulders. "I'm not just some street kid. My name is Lionel Jackson. My grandmother saved my cousin's life last summer with this technique when the hospital sent her home to die." Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the doctors. "She's getting worse by the minute. What do we have to lose?" Dr. Monroe stepped forward. "This is completely unorthodox and potentially dangerous. I cannot endorse this." "I didn't ask for your endorsement," Marcus said firmly. "Where's the nearest sink?" The group moved to the ensuite bathroom, where a custom marble sink gleamed under recessed lighting. Marcus hesitated, looking at Lionel. "Just hold her so her head is under the faucet. Keep the water cool, not cold. Let it run over the back of her head and neck for 3 minutes, Lionel instructed. "My grandmother says it breaks the cycle of the fever." As the doctors watched with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, Marcus gently positioned Zara under the running water. Her cries strengthened initially, then gradually calmed. After 3 minutes, Marcus wrapped her in a soft towel, drying her dark curls. Dr. Monroe stepped forward with a thermometer. Everyone held their breath as he checked her temperature. 103.8, he announced. "It's down a full degree already." "Keep checking every 5 minutes, Lionel said confidently. "It'll keep dropping." True to his word, Zara's temperature continued to fall. Within an hour, it was 101.3. The baby's eyes were open, alert for the first time in days. She even took some formula. The doctors huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed tones about possible scientific explanations for what had happened. Words like rapid cooling of the hypothalamus and vagal response floated through their conversation. Marcus sat in a rocking chair, holding Zara close to his chest. His eyes found Lionel, who stood awkwardly by the door. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "You saved her when no one else could." Richard approached Lionel, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn this?" "My grandmother. She was a midwife in Jamaica for 40 years before coming to New York. She knows all kinds of remedies doctors don't teach in medical school." Richard nodded slowly. "And why did you help us? You risked getting arrested breaking into my home." Lionel met his gaze. "Because a baby needed help. It doesn't matter whose baby it is." The truth was more complicated. Lionel had recognized Richard Douglas immediately. 3 years ago, Douglas Development had bought the building where Lionel's family had lived for generations. They were evicted with hundreds of others to make way for luxury condos. His grandmother had to move to a 5th-floor walk-up that worsened her arthritis. But Lionel kept this to himself. The baby wasn't responsible for her grandfather's actions. "I want to meet this grandmother of yours," Richard declared. "Anyone who knows something 20 of the country's top doctors doesn't is someone I need to know." Lionel hesitated. His grandmother had no love for Richard Douglas. "She's very private, sir." "I insist," Richard said in a tone that suggested he wasn't used to being refused. "Dinner tomorrow night. Here, bring her." Lionel nodded, already dreading telling his grandmother where they were invited. When Lionel returned to their Harlem apartment that evening, his grandmother, Estelle Jackson was preparing dinner. "Where have you been, child? I expected you home hours ago," she called from the kitchen. Lionel took a deep breath. "Grandma, you're not going to believe what happened today." He told her about the baby, the mansion, and how he'd used her remedy to save the child. Estelle nodded approvingly until he mentioned the Douglas name. Her wooden spoon clattered to the floor. "Douglas? Richard Douglas? The devil who threw us out of our home?" "Yes, Grandma, but his granddaughter was dying." Estelle's eyes softened slightly. The sins of the father shouldn't fall on the child. Then her expression hardened again. "But I'm not stepping foot in that man's house. He invited us to dinner tomorrow. He wants to thank you." Estelle laughed bitterly. "Thank me? He can thank me by giving our old building back to the community." She shook her head. "No, Lionel. I won't go." Lionel understood his grandmother's anger. After the eviction, his grandfather's health had declined rapidly. The stress of losing their home of 40 years had been too much for his heart. He died 3 months later. "I think you should go," Lionel said quietly. "Not for him, for the baby, and for yourself." Estelle gave him a sharp look. "What do you mean, for myself? You always say that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This is your chance to let go of some poison, Grandma." Estelle was silent for a long moment. "When did you get so wise, child?" "I learned from the best," Lionel replied with a small smile. The next evening, Lionel and Estelle arrived at the Douglas mansion. Estelle wore her Sunday church dress, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She clutched her purse tightly as they were led through the grand foyer. In the dining room, Richard, Marcus, and baby Zara waited. The table was set with fine china and crystal, but only for 4 places. "Where are all those doctors from yesterday?" Lionel asked. "Gone," Richard said. "Back to their hospitals and practices, scratching their heads about what happened." Marcus stood and approached Estelle with Zara in his arms. "Mrs. Jackson, I can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with your grandson. Zara is completely fever-free today." Estelle's stern expression softened at the sight of the baby. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Marcus carefully transferred Zara to Estelle's experienced hold. The older woman examined the baby with practiced eyes, feeling her forehead and looking into her eyes. "She's strong," Estelle declared. "A fighter. But you should add a drop of cod liver oil to her formula for the next week. It will help her recover her strength." "I'll make sure it's done," Marcus promised. During dinner, the conversation was strained at first. Richard attempted small talk while Estelle answered politely but briefly. Finally, Richard addressed the elephant in the room. "Mrs. Jackson, Lionel mentioned you lived in one of my buildings in Harlem." "Not anymore," Estelle replied coldly. "Not since you decided our homes were worth more empty than with families in them." Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Business decisions are rarely personal, Mrs. Jackson." "They're always personal to the people affected by them," she countered. "My husband died 3 months after we were evicted. 40 years we lived there. 40 years of memories stripped away for your business decision." The table fell silent. Marcus looked between his father and Estelle, understanding dawning on his face. "Dad," he said quietly, "is this about the Carter Street development?" Richard nodded stiffly. "The one I told you was a mistake? The one I begged you not to proceed with because it would displace hundreds of families?" Marcus pressed. "The very same," Estelle confirmed. "Your father offered us $3,000 to leave our home of 4 decades, as if a lifetime could be bought so cheaply." Richard set down his fork. "The project made financial sense at the time. And now," Marcus challenged, 3 years later, with half the building still empty because you priced it so high even doctors can't afford it?" Lionel watched the family drama unfold, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He hadn't come for revenge or to cause problems. He'd come to help a baby. "I think we should go," he said, standing up. "Thank you for dinner." "Wait," Richard said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "Please stay. I owe both of you an apology." Estelle raised an eyebrow but remained seated. Richard continued, Yesterday, I had 20 of the most educated, well-paid medical professionals in the country in my home. I threw money at the problem like I always do, and none of it helped. He looked at Zara, now sleeping peacefully in a bassinet near the table. Then this young man walks in with knowledge passed down through generations, not learned in some Ivy League medical school, and saves my granddaughter's life. "What's your point, Mr. Douglas?" Estelle asked. "My point is that I've spent my life valuing the wrong things. Buildings over people, profits over communities." Marcus looked shocked at his father's words. Richard turned to his son. "You were right about Carter Street. It was a mistake, a project conceived out of greed, not necessity." He then addressed Estelle and Lionel. "I can't undo the pain my decision caused your family, but I can try to make amends." "How?" Estelle asked skeptically. "To start, I'd like to offer Lionel a full scholarship to any college he chooses. His quick thinking and courage deserve to be rewarded." Lionel's eyes widened. College had always seemed like an impossible dream due to financial constraints. "And," Richard continued, "I'd like to discuss converting part of the Carter Street building into a community health clinic. Mrs. Jackson, with your knowledge of traditional medicine, you could be an invaluable consultant." Estelle's expression remained guarded. "Pretty words, Mr. Douglas, but I've heard promises from rich men before." "Not promises," Marcus interjected, holding up a folder. "Legal documents. I had them drawn up this afternoon." He handed the folder to Estelle. "A trust for Lionel's education and initial funding for the clinic. All that's needed are your signatures." Estelle studied the papers carefully. "And what do you want in return?" "Our silence about how 20 fancy doctors couldn't do what my grandson did." Richard shook his head. "No conditions, Mrs. Jackson. Consider it restitution, not a transaction." "And a thank you," Marcus added, looking at his daughter, "for giving me back my world." Later that night, as Lionel and his grandmother walked home, they discussed the unexpected turn of events. "Do you think he meant it?" Lionel asked. "About the clinic and the scholarship?" Estelle patted the folder in her purse. "These papers say he does, but only time will tell if Richard Douglas has truly changed or if this is just his guilty conscience talking." "And if it is just guilt?" Estelle smiled. "Then we take what's offered and do good with it. That's the best revenge against a man like that, using his money to heal the community he once hurt." Lionel thought about baby Zara, and how something as simple as water had saved her, and expensive medicines couldn't. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones people overlook. "That's right," Estelle agreed, "and sometimes people need to lose everything to understand what really matters." 1 year later, the Carter Street Health Clinic opened its doors. The modern facility combined conventional medicine with traditional healing practices. Estelle supervised a training program for young medical students interested in holistic approaches. Lionel, now in his first year at Columbia University studying pre-med, volunteered there on weekends. Marcus brought Zara to the grand opening. Now a toddler, she tottered around on wobbly legs, her dark curls bouncing with each step. Richard Douglas cut the ribbon, looking older but somehow lighter than he had a year ago. "This clinic stands as a reminder that wisdom comes in many forms," Richard said in his speech, "and that sometimes a child knows more than 20 doctors." The crowd chuckled, but those who knew the story understood the deeper truth behind his words. After the ceremony, Estelle found herself alone with Richard for a moment. "I still don't like you much, Mr. Douglas," she said frankly. Richard laughed. "I don't expect you to, Mrs. Jackson, but I hope you believe I'm trying to be better." "Actions speak louder than words," she replied. "Keep acting right, and maybe in another 10 years I'll consider forgiving you." As they watched Lionel showing Zara a picture book in the clinic's waiting area, Richard said softly, "I never thought my legacy would include something like this. I always believed buildings were my legacy." "Buildings fall," Estelle said. "Communities endure." Across the room, Marcus approached Lionel. "Have you thought about what you'll specialize in after medical school?" Lionel nodded. "Pediatrics. And I want to study traditional medicine from around the world, not just my grandmother's Jamaican remedies." Well, the Douglas Foundation will fund that research, Marcus promised. What you did for Zara, it wasn't just about saving one baby. It was about showing us a different way to see the world. Lionel watched his grandmother talking with Richard Douglas, the unlikely pair who'd become partners in this venture. A year ago, they had been enemies. Now they were cautious allies united by a common purpose. That, Lionel thought, was the real miracle. Not that running water could break a fever, but that healing could flow in many directions at once. The baby had been saved, but so had the billionaire, from his own blindness. And perhaps his grandmother had been healed too, her bitterness gradually giving way to purpose. As for Lionel, he had found his calling. Not revenge for past wrongs, but restoration, building bridges between worlds that are rarely connected, between the knowledge of the past and the science of the present, between those with wealth and those with wisdom. Sometimes the most unthinkable act isn't saving a life, it's changing one. And sometimes the best revenge isn't making others suffer, but helping them see. For in the end, what had started as a moment of crisis had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. A new beginning.